The sun was setting over the quiet streets of Washington, D.C. as Maya Thompson drove home from her evening study group at Georgetown University. The 19-year-old pre-law student had just finished reviewing cases for her constitutional law class, and her mind was still going over the important points about civil rights they had discussed. Her dark blue Toyota Corolla, a graduation gift from her father, was well maintained and moving steadily at the speed limit. The flash of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror caught her by surprise. Maya checked her speedometer again. She was certain she hadn't been speeding. With the calm that came from her father's careful instructions about traffic stops, she pulled over to the right, turned off her engine, and placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be clearly seen. Officer James Cooper watched the Corolla pull over, his judgment already clouded by the assumptions he'd made when he glimpsed the young black driver. He'd been having a bad day. His supervisor had questioned his high number of stops in minority neighborhoods, and his wife had been arguing with him about working too many extra shifts. He needed to prove himself right about something today. Maya's heart beat faster as she watched the officer approach in her side mirror. The street was getting dark, and there weren't many other cars around. She took a deep breath, remembering her father's words. "Stay calm, be respectful, but know your rights." License and registration. Officer Cooper barked before he had even fully reached her window. His flashlight beam hit Maya's face with unnecessary brightness. "Good evening, officer," Maya replied politely, keeping her hands visible. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" "I'll ask the questions here," Cooper snapped. "License and registration now." Maya spoke clearly and calmly. "I'm going to reach for my documents in the glove compartment now, sir." She moved slowly, deliberately, just as she'd practiced with her father. The leather wallet containing her license and registration was right where it should be. Cooper snatched the documents from her hand. "You made an illegal lane change back there," he said, though Maya knew she'd done no such thing. She had been extra careful with her driving, as always. "Sir, I don't believe I made any illegal lane changes," Maya said respectfully but firmly. "I've been driving straight on this road for the past 10 minutes. Cooper's face hardened at her response. "Are you saying I'm lying?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Step out of the vehicle." "Officer, I don't understand why that's necessary," Maya said, her legal training kicking in. "I haven't committed any traffic violation that would require." "I said step out of the vehicle." Cooper's hand moved to his belt. "I can smell marijuana coming from this car." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She knew there was no marijuana. She had never used drugs in her life. But she also knew this false claim was often used to justify unnecessary searches. "Sir, I respectfully decline to exit my vehicle without probable cause. There are no drugs in this car, and I have not committed any traffic violations." "That's it," Cooper growled, yanking open her car door. "You're interfering with a police investigation. Get out now." Maya started her phone's video recording feature as discreetly as she could, another safety measure her father had taught her. She knew she was about to become another statistic, another story of law enforcement overreach, but she refused to let fear overwhelm her. As Cooper roughly pulled her from the car, Maya caught sight of his nameplate and badge number, committing them to memory. She noticed his body camera's red light was off, another violation she added to her mental list. Even as he twisted her arms behind her back, Maya maintained her composure, reciting her rights clearly for the phone's recording. "Officer Cooper, badge number 6741, you are violating my civil rights under the Fourth Amendment," she stated firmly. "I do not consent to this search or arrest, and I will be filing a formal complaint." The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into her wrists as Cooper made them unnecessarily tight. Maya could feel her law books sliding off her back seat as the officer pushed her toward his patrol car, but her mind was already 3 steps ahead, planning her next moves. What she didn't know yet was that this incident would set in motion changes that would reshape the entire police department, and Officer Cooper's career would never be the same. The inside of Officer Cooper's patrol car smelled like stale coffee and anger. Maya sat in the back seat with her hands cuffed behind her, watching through the metal grate as Cooper began searching her car without permission. Her phone was still recording in her pocket, capturing every sound of this illegal search. "I'm telling you again, Officer Cooper, you have no probable cause for this search," Maya called out, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. She could see him throwing her textbooks around, making a mess of her carefully organized study materials. Cooper emerged from the car with a small plastic bag in his gloved hand, and Maya's blood ran cold. She knew she had never seen that bag before in her life. Well, what do we have here? Cooper said with a smirk that made Maya's stomach turn. That's not mine, Maya stated firmly, her pre-law training kicking in. I'd like to speak to your supervising officer immediately, and I'm invoking my right to remain silent until my lawyer is present. Cooper ignored her request, walking to his computer to run her license. His face changed slightly as he read her record, completely clean, not even a parking ticket, Georgetown University student ID. Perfect driving record. This wasn't the profile he had expected. Listen here, he said, turning back to face her through the car window. I can make this very difficult for you, or we can handle this quietly. Just admit the bag is yours, and maybe we can work something out. Maya sat up straighter, her chin high. Officer Cooper, I'm recording this conversation. You just planted evidence in my vehicle and attempted to coerce a false confession. I know my rights, and I know the law. I will not be admitting to anything because I've done nothing wrong. Cooper's face turned red with anger. He hadn't expected this level of legal knowledge from someone so young. Recording me without consent is illegal, he snapped, reaching for the car door. This is a one-party consent jurisdiction, Officer Cooper, Maya replied calmly. And as this is a public interaction with law enforcement, I have every right to record it. Now, I'll say it one more time, I want to speak to your supervisor. Instead of calling his supervisor, Cooper got into the driver's seat and started the engine. You're going to central booking, he announced. We'll see how smart you are after a night in jail. As they drove through the darkening streets, Maya focused on remembering every detail. The time was 7:43 p.m. when they left the scene. Cooper had never read her Miranda rights. The planted evidence had been in a small blue plastic bag. The search had begun at 7:31 p.m., approximately 12 minutes after the initial stop. At the police station, Cooper roughly led Maya through the booking process. Other officers gave them curious looks. They weren't used to seeing such well-dressed, articulate young people in handcuffs. Maya kept her head high, making eye contact with everyone she passed. She wanted them to remember her face. Name? The booking officer asked tiredly. Maya Thompson, she answered clearly. And I'd like to make my phone call now. The booking officer looked up at her name, a flash of recognition crossing his face. But before he could say anything, Cooper interrupted. Process her first. Phone calls come later. Maya memorized the booking officer's name tag. Officer Rodriguez, badge #4492. Another witness for later. As they took her fingerprints and mugshot, Maya noticed her Georgetown University ID card sitting on the booking desk. She saw Officer Rodriguez pick it up and study it more closely, his eyes widening slightly. He began typing something into his computer with increased interest. Date of birth? Rodriguez asked, his tone notably more professional than before. February 15, 2005, Maya replied. She noticed Rodriguez writing something on a separate piece of paper, but Cooper was too busy filling out his arrest report to notice. In the holding cell, Maya finally let out a long breath. Her father was at a law enforcement leadership conference in Chicago, probably in meetings all day. She hadn't been able to reach him yet. But she knew that when he found out about this, Officer Cooper's world would turn upside down. What Cooper didn't realize as he sat smugly finishing his paperwork was that he had just arrested the daughter of Police Commissioner Marcus Thompson, and by this time tomorrow, his 15-year career of unchecked racial profiling would finally catch up with him. The holding cell was cold and smelled of bleach and despair. Maya sat on the metal bench, her back straight against the concrete wall, observing everything around her. She wasn't alone. 5 other women shared the cell, all of them women of color. 2 were sleeping, 1 was crying quietly, and 2 were talking in whispers. First time? Asked an older woman with kind eyes, who had introduced herself as Mrs. Jackson. She had been arrested for sitting in her own car outside her house because a neighbor had reported a suspicious person. Yes, Maya replied, keeping her voice low. I'm Maya. I was stopped for a supposed traffic violation, but the officer planted evidence in my car. A younger woman named Tasha shook her head. Let me guess, Officer Cooper. When Maya nodded, Tasha continued. He's known in our community. Always targeting young black people, planting evidence, making up charges. But nobody ever believes us. Maya leaned forward, her legal training kicking in. Have you filed complaints? Documented the incidents? What's the point? Mrs. Jackson sighed. Nothing ever changes. They protect their own. Things are about to change, Maya said firmly. She looked around at the women. I'm a law student at Georgetown, and I've documented everything tonight. Would you be willing to share your experiences? We could build a pattern of behavior. For the next hour, Maya listened and memorized details. Tasha had been arrested 3 times by Cooper, all on bogus charges that were later dropped. Mrs. Jackson had filed 2 complaints that disappeared into the system. Another woman, Sarah, had lost her job after Cooper arrested her on false charges the day before an important presentation. Around midnight, Officer Rodriguez appeared at the cell door. Thompson, he called out. Your phone call. Maya had been waiting for this moment. She knew her father would still be in meetings at the conference, but she had another plan. At the phone, she dialed a number she had memorized years ago. This is Maya Thompson. I need to speak to Attorney Janet Chen, please. It's an emergency. Maya knew her father's longtime friend, and the department's legal counsel would understand the situation immediately. Within 15 minutes, Janet Chen's authoritative voice filled the booking area. I'm here for Maya Thompson, she announced, her heels clicking on the tile floor. And I need to speak to the watch commander immediately. Maya could hear the confusion in the officers' voices as they tried to understand why one of the department's top lawyers was here in the middle of the night for a routine drug arrest. She smiled slightly, knowing things were about to change. Back in the holding cell, Maya shared what she had learned about filing effective complaints and documenting police misconduct with the other women. She wrote down Janet Chen's office number on small pieces of paper torn from Mrs. Jackson's crossword puzzle book, passing them out quietly. When you get out, Maya whispered, call this number. Say Maya Thompson gave it to you. Tell them everything that happened with Officer Cooper. Every detail matters. Around 3 a.m., the cell door opened again. Thompson, the guard called. You're being released. All charges dropped. As Maya gathered her belongings at the front desk, she saw Janet Chen in intense conversation with the watch commander. Their voices were low, but Maya caught phrases like serious misconduct and pattern of behavior and commissioner's office. Maya, Janet said, turning to her, your father's been notified. He's on the first flight back from Chicago. She looked at the watch commander. And I trust Officer Cooper will be placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. The watch commander nodded quickly, his face pale. Of course, counselor. We'll launch a full investigation first thing in the morning. Before leaving, Maya turned back to the holding cell area. Don't forget, she called out to the women. Remember that number. Things are going to change. As she walked out of the station into the early morning darkness, Maya felt a mix of emotions. Anger at the injustice, determination to make changes, and a deep sadness for all the women still sitting in that cell. She knew her father would be furious when he found out, but more importantly, he would be in a position to do something about it. Officer Cooper's shift would be starting in a few hours. He had no idea that this was going to be his last morning putting on a police uniform for a very long time. Police Commissioner Marcus Thompson stood at the window of his Chicago hotel room, his phone gripped tightly in his hand. It was 4:30 a.m., and the city lights twinkled below him, but he barely noticed them. The voicemail from Janet Chen kept playing in his mind. Marcus, it's about Maya. She's been arrested. Cooper did it. You need to come back now. His daughter, is Maya, in jail. The thought made his hands shake with a mixture of fury and fear. As both the father and the highest-ranking black officer in the department, he knew exactly what could happen during police encounters. That's why he had trained Maya so carefully about her rights. Sir, your car is ready, a young officer said from the doorway. Thompson had been in the middle of a critical conference about police reform. Ironic, given the circumstances, but none of that mattered now. He grabbed his bag and headed for the elevator. During the ride to the airport, Thompson received a detailed email from Janet. His jaw clenched as he read about the illegal search, the planted evidence, the rough treatment. But what really caught his attention were the names of the other women in the holding cell with Maya. He recognized some of them from previous complaint files that had mysteriously disappeared before reaching his desk. "Cancel all my meetings for today," he told his assistant over the phone. "And get me Officer James Cooper's complete personnel file. Every complaint, every incident report, every evaluation. I want it all on my desk by the time I land." On the early morning flight back to D.C., Thompson reviewed everything he knew about Cooper. The officer had been with the department for 15 years, working mostly in minority neighborhoods. There had been whispers about his conduct, but nothing ever stuck. Now Thompson understood why. Cooper had friends in internal affairs who had been burying the complaints. His phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "I'm okay, Dad, but this has to stop. Not just Cooper, the whole system that protects officers like him." Thompson felt a surge of pride through his worry. His daughter wasn't just thinking about herself. She was thinking about systemic change, just like her mother would have. As the plane began its descent, Thompson received another email. This one was from Officer Rodriguez, the booking officer from last night. It contained surveillance footage from the station, body camera footage from other officers who had been present, and a list of similar incidents involving Cooper that had never made it into official reports. "Commissioner," the email read, "I've been keeping records, waiting for the right time. I think that time is now." Thompson's driver was waiting at the airport. "Take me to the station," he ordered, his voice calm but firm. He had learned long ago that anger was more effective when controlled, when channeled into action rather than emotion. In the car, he called the deputy commissioner. "I want Cooper in my office at 9 a.m. sharp. Don't tell him why, and get me the heads of internal affairs and professional standards, too." As they drove through the morning traffic, Thompson thought about all the times he'd had to have the talk with Maya about dealing with police. He remembered teaching her to keep her hands visible, to speak respectfully but firmly, to know her rights. He had hoped his position would somehow protect her, but last night had proven that no amount of success could shield their children from systemic racism. The car pulled up to the station just as Officer Cooper was arriving for his shift. Thompson watched through the tinted windows as Cooper strutted up the steps, adjusting his badge with the casual confidence of a man who thought he was untouchable. "Sir," his driver asked, waiting for instructions. "Give me 5 minutes," Thompson replied, taking out his phone to review the evidence one more time. Let him get to the locker room. Let him put on his uniform. Let him think this is just another normal day. In exactly 1 hour, Cooper would be standing in the commissioner's office, coming face to face with not just a superior officer, but a father whose daughter he had wrongfully arrested. And Marcus Thompson was going to make sure this was a meeting Officer James Cooper would never forget. The conference room on the top floor of police headquarters was silent, except for the sound of video playback. On the large screen, body camera footage showed Officer Cooper's illegal search of Maya's car. Around the table sat 5 people. 2 internal affairs investigators, the head of professional standards, Janet Chen, and Commissioner Thompson. "Play it again," Thompson said quietly, his face showing no emotion. "This time, focus on the moment he plants the evidence." The footage rolled again. The investigators watched as Cooper stepped away from his patrol car, his hand moving suspiciously near his pocket, before he began searching Maya's vehicle. Moments later, he discovered the small blue bag. "Freeze it there," Janet Chen commanded. She stood up and pointed to the timestamp. "Now compare this to the dashcam footage from 20 minutes earlier, during his previous traffic stop." The second video showed Cooper approaching another car. The same hand movement, the same pocket, but this time, no discovery. "He's been doing this for years," said Rodriguez, who had been invited to present his evidence. He placed a thick folder on the table. "I've been documenting similar incidents. Always young people of color. Always the same blue bags. Always during evening shifts when he knew certain supervisors were on duty." Thompson opened the folder. Inside were dozens of statements, photographs, and detailed notes. Names, dates, times. Complaints that had vanished from the system. Cases that had been dismissed but never investigated. "Sir," one of the internal affairs investigators spoke up, looking uncomfortable. "Some of these cases were cleared by our department." "Yes," Thompson replied, his voice like steel. "We'll be investigating those clearances too. Every officer who helped bury these complaints will be held accountable." The door opened and Maya entered, dressed professionally in a blazer and skirt. The investigators sat up straighter, recognizing her from the footage they'd been watching. "Miss Thompson," Janet Chen said, "please tell these officers exactly what happened last night." Maya's testimony was clear and detailed. She described every violation of procedure, every illegal action, every attempt at intimidation. She included what she had learned from the other women in the holding cell, painting a picture of years of systematic abuse of power. "And you have recordings of the entire incident?" the professional standards head asked. Maya nodded and placed her phone on the table. "Audio and video, including Officer Cooper's attempt to coerce a false confession." As they listened to the recordings, Thompson watched the investigators' faces. He saw the moment they realized just how serious this was, not just one bad arrest, but years of civil rights violations that they had helped cover up through their inaction. "Commissioner," Janet Chen said, standing up, "given the evidence, we recommend immediate termination of Officer Cooper's employment, followed by a criminal investigation into his actions." Thompson shook his head. "Not yet. First, we expand this investigation. I want every case Cooper has handled in the past 5 years reviewed. Every complaint that was dismissed. Every supervisor who signed off on his reports. This isn't about one officer anymore." The investigators exchanged nervous glances. This kind of thorough investigation would expose problems throughout the department. "Dad," Maya spoke up, "the women I met last night, they need to know their voices will be heard this time." Thompson looked at his daughter with pride. Even after everything she'd been through, she was thinking about helping others. "Janet," he said, "set up a special task force. I want independent oversight, community representatives, and civil rights attorneys involved. Maya, if you're willing, I'd like you to help coordinate with the victims." Maya nodded firmly. "I already have their contact information." As the meeting continued, evidence mounted. Cooper's pattern of behavior became clearer with each file they opened. Text messages between officers showing coordination to hide complaints. Supervisors who had looked the other way. A system that had protected the guilty and ignored the innocent. "Sir," Rodriguez said quietly, "Cooper is waiting in your office. He still doesn't know why he was called in." Thompson stood up, straightening his uniform. "Good. Let's keep him waiting a little longer. I want this investigation absolutely airtight before I face him." The room buzzed with activity as the team began their work. For the first time in 15 years, Officer James Cooper's actions would be thoroughly investigated. And this time, there would be nowhere to hide. Officer James Cooper shifted uncomfortably in his chair, checking his watch again. He'd been waiting in Commissioner Thompson's office for over 2 hours. The large, well-decorated office made him nervous, with its wall of awards and the impressive view of the city. Something felt different today, but he couldn't figure out what it was. The door finally opened, and Commissioner Thompson walked in, followed by Janet Chen and Maya. Cooper's face went pale as he recognized the young woman he had arrested last night. His eyes darted between Maya and the commissioner, and the realization hit him like a physical blow. "Officer Cooper," Thompson said calmly, sitting behind his desk, "I believe you've already met my daughter, Maya." Cooper stood up quickly, knocking his chair backward. "Sir, I can explain." "Sit down," Thompson commanded, his voice quiet but powerful. Cooper's legs seemed to give out, and he collapsed back into his righted chair. "Let's review your night, shall we?" Thompson pressed a button, and the body camera footage began playing on the large screen behind his desk. An illegal stop, an illegal search, planting evidence, false arrest, all captured on various cameras and audio recordings. "Sir, I was just doing my job," Cooper stammered. "The car was suspicious." A Georgetown University student driving a registered Toyota Corolla was suspicious. Maya interrupted, her voice firm. "Or was it just the color of my skin that made you suspicious, Officer Cooper?" Cooper's face reddened. "You were disrespectful." "We have the recordings, Cooper," Janet Chen cut in. "Every word, every action, including your attempt to coerce a false confession." Thompson stood up slowly, placing his hands on his desk. "But here's what's really interesting, Cooper. While you were keeping my daughter in a holding cell, Officer Rodriguez was sharing some fascinating information with us. Years of similar incidents, dozens of false arrests, planted evidence, all with the same blue bags from the same pocket." Cooper's face went from red to white. That's not. You can't prove. Actually, we can, Thompson said, opening a thick folder. You see, Rodriguez kept meticulous records. Dates, times, badge numbers of officers who helped cover up complaints. Everything. Those people were criminals. Cooper burst out, his true colors showing. They'd all had something to hide. Like my daughter? Thompson asked softly, dangerously. A pre-law student with a perfect record? Or like Mrs. Jackson, a retired schoolteacher you arrested for sitting in her own car? Or maybe like Sarah Chen, who lost her job because of your false arrest? Cooper looked around wildly, like a trapped animal. You're going to believe them over a fellow officer? I've served this department for 15 years. You've disgraced this department for 15 years, Thompson corrected him. You violated civil rights, abused your power, and broken the trust of the community we're supposed to protect. Maya stepped forward, placing her phone on the desk. Everything from last night is recorded here. Every illegal action, every violation of protocol, every attempt at intimidation. But more importantly, I have statements from other victims. Women who were afraid to speak up before but aren't afraid anymore. Cooper's arrogance finally cracked. You can't do this to me, he pleaded. I have a family, a pension. You should have thought about that before you decided to plant evidence on an innocent young woman, Janet Chen said coldly. Before you decided that her life, her future, meant nothing to you. Thompson pressed another button on his desk. 2 internal affairs officers entered the room. Officer James Cooper, Thompson said formally, you are hereby suspended without pay pending a full investigation into your conduct. You will surrender your badge and weapon immediately. You're making a mistake, Cooper said desperately as the IA officers approached. Those people, they're all lying. You're really going to take their word over mine? Thompson walked around his desk until he stood face to face with Cooper. No, Officer Cooper. The mistake was yours. You thought your badge made you untouchable. You thought your racism could hide behind a uniform. But today, that ends. As the IA officers led Cooper out, he turned back one last time. Commissioner, please. Get him out of my sight, Thompson ordered. Then he turned to his daughter and pulled her into a tight hug. I'm so sorry, baby girl, but I promise you, this is just the beginning. Things are going to change around here. Maya hugged her father back, watching over his shoulder as Cooper was led away, his badge and gun already removed. They already have, Dad, she said. They already have. 1 month after Cooper's suspension, the main conference room at police headquarters was packed with people. Community leaders sat alongside police officers, civil rights attorneys mixed with department officials. At the front of the room, Commissioner Thompson stood with Maya beside him, ready to announce the department's new reforms. What happened to my daughter was not just about one officer, Thompson began, his voice carrying through the silent room. It was about a system that protected bad behavior and ignored the voices of our community. Today, that changes. Maya stepped forward, now dressed in a professional suit, her Georgetown Law acceptance letter freshly framed in her father's office. Over the past month, we've interviewed over 50 victims of similar incidents. Their stories have helped us identify where the system failed and how we can fix it. On the large screen behind them, pictures of the women from the holding cell appeared. Mrs. Jackson, now part of the new Community Oversight Board, sat in the front row. Tasha, who had become an active voice for reform, stood along the wall. Sarah, who had gotten her job back after her wrongful arrest was exposed, took notes from her seat. First, Thompson announced, we're establishing an independent review board for all complaints against officers. This board will include community members, civil rights attorneys, and retired judges. No more internal investigations disappearing into thin air. Officer Rodriguez, recently promoted to head of the new Accountability Division, handed out detailed packets explaining the new system. His courage in documenting Cooper's actions had inspired other officers to come forward with similar evidence against corrupt colleagues. Second, Maya continued, we're implementing mandatory body camera reviews. Every traffic stop, every arrest, every interaction will be reviewed by an independent team. Any officer who turns off their camera or fails to record an interaction will face immediate suspension. In the back of the room, several older officers shifted uncomfortably. They were part of the old system that had protected Cooper. Now, under the new rules, 3 of them were facing disciplinary action for helping cover up complaints. Third, Thompson said firmly, "We're creating a public database of officer conduct. Every complaint, every use of force incident, every traffic stop will be recorded and available for public review. Transparency builds trust." Janet Chen stepped forward with more announcements. The department is also implementing new training programs. Cultural sensitivity training, de-escalation techniques, and implicit bias awareness will be mandatory for all officers, from rookies to senior command. Maya watched as the changes she and her father had worked so hard to implement were unveiled. The nightmare of her arrest had turned into a catalyst for real change. Cooper's case had exposed not just one bad officer, but an entire network of corruption and cover-ups. Finally, Thompson concluded, "We're establishing a scholarship fund for young people interested in law enforcement careers. We need officers who reflect and understand our community. The Maya Thompson Scholarship will help make that happen." Maya hadn't known about this last part. She looked at her father in surprise as the room erupted in applause. Tears formed in her eyes as she thought about how her terrible night in jail was now turning into something positive for future generations. After the presentation, Mrs. Jackson approached Maya with a hug. "Child, you turned your pain into power," she said softly. "Because of you, my granddaughter might not have to fear the police the way I did." Officer Rodriguez joined them, smiling. "Cooper's trial starts next week," he reported. "With all the evidence we've gathered, he's facing serious time, and 3 more officers have been suspended for similar conduct." Maya nodded, feeling both satisfied and determined. "It's not just about punishing bad officers," she said. "It's about changing the culture that protected them. Dad always says real change happens from within." As the room slowly emptied, Thompson watched his daughter speaking with community members, offering legal advice and sharing her story. She had taken a traumatic experience and turned it into a movement for change, just like her mother would have done. "Sir," Janet Chen said, approaching with more documents. "The FBI wants to use our new accountability system as a model for other departments. They're calling it the Thompson Protocol." Thompson smiled, watching Maya in action. "No," he said, "call it the Maya Protocol. Sometimes it takes our children to show us the way forward." 6 months later, Maya stood in the back of the courtroom, watching as James Cooper was led away in handcuffs. The jury had found him guilty on all charges: evidence tampering, false arrest, civil rights violations, and abuse of power. His 15-year career of discrimination and corruption had finally come to an end. 5 years, her father said quietly beside her. Plus, he can never work in law enforcement again. Commissioner Thompson had recused himself from the investigation, but he hadn't missed a single day of the trial. He wanted Cooper to see him there, to understand that power didn't mean privilege anymore. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered around Maya and her father. The case had gained national attention, becoming a symbol of police reform and accountability. But Maya wasn't interested in talking about Cooper anymore. She had bigger news to share. "Today isn't just about one officer's punishment," Maya announced to the cameras. "It's about introducing the Maya Protocol, a new national standard for police accountability that's being adopted by departments across the country." The program she and her father had developed was revolutionary. Body cameras that couldn't be turned off, independent civilian review boards, regular psychological evaluations for officers, mandatory reporting of all stops and arrests, with racial data made public. Everything transparent, everything accountable. And, Thompson added proudly, "My daughter has just been appointed to the National Police Reform Commission while still pursuing her law degree at Georgetown." Maya smiled, remembering that terrifying night in the holding cell. She had promised those women things would change, and she had kept her word. Mrs. Jackson now led community outreach programs at the academy. Tasha had become a certified trainer in the department's new cultural sensitivity program. Sarah was helping develop anti-bias training materials. Back at police headquarters, Maya walked through the halls with her father. Officers nodded respectfully as they passed. The culture was different now. The old guard who had protected Cooper were gone, replaced by a new generation of officers who believed in accountability and community trust. "Officer Martinez," Maya called out, stopping a young patrol officer. How's the new system working out? Martinez smiled, touching her body camera. Much better, Ms. Thompson. The automatic upload means no more technical difficulties, and the community seems more trusting when they know everything's being recorded properly. In Thompson's office, Maya looked at the wall of change. Newspaper headlines about Cooper's conviction hung beside articles about the Maya protocol. Pictures showed community meetings, training sessions, and graduation ceremonies for new officers, each class more diverse than the last. Dad, Maya said, picking up a framed photo of her mother. Do you think Mom would be proud of what we've done? Thompson wrapped an arm around his daughter. She always said true justice needs both law and heart. You've shown you have both. Maya's phone buzzed with a message from Janet Chen. Another department in another city wanted to implement the Maya protocol. They needed someone to help set it up, train their officers, and connect with their community. Go, Thompson said, seeing the message. This is bigger than our city now. This is about changing the whole system. Before leaving, Maya stopped by the holding cell where she had spent that fateful night. It was empty now. The new protocols meant fewer arrests, more community interventions, and better justice for everyone. Excuse me, Miss Thompson? A young black girl, about 12, approached shyly. I'm doing a school project on how to make change in our community. Would you have time to talk? Maya smiled, remembering how her own journey had started. What's your name?